my bed to the floor. 5, 6, 7, 8. Will today be rough or will today be great? 9, 10, 11, 12. Lately I've been going through hell. 13, 14, 15, 16. Today's the day. Are you coming? Are you sick of being normal? I'm sick of being average. I'm sick of being mortal. I'm about to be a savage. I see a lot of things that I want, I will have them. I got a new mindset that I just established. I'll march through the cold with the nails on the pavement. I'll shovel that coal just to get out the basement. My story will be told, helping others make changes. I'll be so bold, they will watch in amazement. Am I gonna face it? Am I gonna chase it? Am I gonna start or will I keep waiting? Time is limited, quickly fading. Get my mind right, it's my time to take it.
Everybody, how's it going? Okay, so it's a late stream today. I am very, very late. I am very sorry about that.
So I got myself Werewolf the Apocalypse. Should I call it the fifth?
Basically, I had kind of a rough day, to be honest about it. But we are going to be doing Overthink. I love this podcast is what they call it, but it's a YouTube channel. I believe the hosts are friends of each other, colleagues. I don't think they're husband and wife. But I like them a lot. They are two of my favorites just in general when it comes to this kind of stuff. So one of the reasons why we're doing this right now is that a lot of times when I tell people that I like them a lot, when I tell people that I like looking at the Bible through a philosophical and literary lens, that means that I look at the Bible itself as philosophy and as literature, and then secondarily as history, over the milieu, the broad umbrella of theology. I end up pissing off both sides. So both the apologists really don't like that point of view, the quote-unquote lay believer doesn't like that point of view, and the scholar, the secular scholar, doesn't like that point of view. To give you an idea, looking at it through the lens of philosophy and the lens of literature is what Jordan Peterson does. Now, he's also adding a psychological viewpoint through it, kind of a Jungian viewpoint, actually, lens, but it's looking at it through philosophy. Philosophy and symbology is also what Jonathan Pagwell does. Well, he does also look at it as theology, as I do. He's looking at it through that philosophical lens, and that's how he's getting all this symbolic meaning from it. So, as I am trying to expand my audience and expand what I cover on my channel, and I do have to apologize for y'all. I know the channel was doing really well, especially when I was doing my stuff on Islam, and then I just seemed to stop with us because I had a full-time job where I was working over 13 hours a day, and I worked every day except Sunday. So the channel quality dipped. I apologize for that. I know that a lot of you have come back and have noticed in the last 2 months the channel has picked up in quality. Well, that's because I have time to work on it again. And as part of this endeavor to give you high quality content, I am trying to stream on this channel at least 4 times a week, and then do at least 1 video a week on this channel. I got another channel that I'm working on, and I have some Twitch stuff that I'm working on for gaming. Actually, I want to have a gaming channel here on YouTube, but that channel doesn't have enough subs yet for me to stream on it, so you know how it goes. Anyway, this is Overthink. Let's go ahead and let me show you the screen. And then for those of you who are part of my usual community, if you guys hop in, wow, you're already here. If you guys hop in, feel free to say hi. I am sorry it is such a late stream. I know I don't usually do it at this time, but like I said, I had kind of a long day. Okay, so This is Overthink, so let's get into it. If you hear a noise in the background, that's my dryer. Like I said, I don't normally stream at this time. We'll probably only go 30 minutes, maybe an hour max. I got work in the morning.
Hello, everyone. I am Overthink Podcast co-host David Pena Guzman, and I am here with co-host Ellie Anderson.
Hello.
And we want to have a chat about the very nature, definition, and possibly also the boundaries of philosophy as a discipline.
The boundaries of philosophy. That's what.
Possibly. The question is whether there are boundaries.
Okay, but I think we're framing this as the boundaries
of philosophy.
And the reason why I chose this particular video as the first reintroduction of philosophy on my channel is that there are limitations to interpretation, and there are limitations into how much you can press into philosophy, press the Bible into philosophy, and how much it actually applies to things. So, for instance, the critical method, deconstructive method, that's a philosophy. That's coming from Foucault. That's coming from Descartes. That's coming from Kierkegaard. So you're breaking down the Bible using a certain method. Basically, you're just using philosophy to understand the Bible, and there are limitations to that. There are limitations when you do that with any literature, and so I think that's important to talk about and to acknowledge.
So
Yes, and you know, the when you think about what philosophy is, the simplest answer is that it is the love of wisdom. It comes from the Greek roots for love and for knowledge or wisdom.
and specifically philia, which is friendly love, as
friendly.
opposed
Thomas, thank
to
you.
eros or agape.
Yes, a more transcendental or sexual love. So we love philosophy. We love wisdom, but in a friendly way.
Yeah,
Um,
we're friends of wisdom.
Okay, if you want to imagine me in college, imagine this guy, but with blue hair and with a tongue piercing, and that's kind of who I was in college. And a little bit more muscle, just a little bit.
We're friends of Sophia, and
We're lovers of Sophia.
I thought that we would talk about how we both see philosophy, because I suspect that we might have different views potentially about whether or not it's even possible to articulate an account of what philosophy is that would neatly separate it from other disciplines that are neighboring it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm
And that's actually very important, because things like science at one point was encompassed in philosophy. I know that sounds weird to most modern ears, but you look at things like theology or any of the other logic, any of the other things that are connected in philosophy, ethics, rhetoric. Some of them more tangential than the others, some of them which have isolated themselves and developed into their own sciences and own arts. It's important to understand that, its connection to philosophy.
I'm going to begin just by asking you that question, whether you think, Ellie, that there is something inherent or intrinsic to philosophy and to the act of philosophizing that creates this discipline that differs, say, from sociology, from anthropology, from literature, so on and so forth.
In answering this question, it's important to consider the history of.
So what I was saying is, it relates to the Bible, is I will look at it as a unified voice, but I'm not saying it's all the same human author. I'm looking at the philosophy that comes out of collecting all these books together. Christians and apologists will say that's the Holy Spirit, but philosophically speaking, you're just looking at the philosophy of the Bible. So that's kind of an interesting take. And I do the same thing when I'm reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead or the Egyptian Book of the Dead. In fact, I love collections of the Assyrian writings or Sumerian writings when they're booked together, because the more of the writings of that society that you can pushed together, the more you can get an idea of the philosophy of the culture.
How the disciplines emerged to begin with. Because for much of human history, what we now consider to be those other disciplines were part of philosophy.
I just said
You
that.
only get the splitting off of sociology, anthropology, psychology, political science in the past couple of centuries. And even though you had the splitting off of the natural sciences from philosophy a few
Earlier,
centuries
yes.
previously, originally those were also part of the purview of philosophy. So, for instance, in ancient Greece, philosophy had a very broad scope, such that many of the disciplines we now recognize today would have fallen under its purview. You can see this, for instance, in the fact that Aristotle wrote a book on physics. He wrote a book on biology. He wrote a book on ethics. He wrote a book on the nature of reality.
I also think it's, on this same note, other cultures haven't made this distinction between politics and philosophy, between religion and philosophy, between religion and science that we have. Thank you, Thomas. So, like, you go and you look at how in India, they will mix in their religious beliefs with the religious teachings, and they'll talk about, they're more open to the idea of extraterrestrial life and things that are possible because of their understanding of their Vedic texts or because of other Hindu texts. It's really interesting how in our culture, due to things like the Enlightenment and the Reformation, we are trying to separate out ways of thinking from each other when originally it was just one giant grouping. And that one group set made conversations, I think, much more interesting. Anyway, that's just my own bias, I guess.
He wrote a book on rhetoric. He wrote a book on theater, right? Like there's all of these areas of inquiry that you find in ancient thought that reveal just how broad philosophy's scope is. And so, although I absolutely recognize and respect that sociology, anthropology, psychology, and so forth have become disciplines in their own right more recently, which means that they have specific areas of inquiry, specific methods that characterize them autonomously, I do not think that there is something intrinsically that separates philosophy from those disciplines. And so part of what's been challenging.
I agree. And when I talk like that, I really piss people off on every side, on every, even on the sides that I'm on. Catholics don't like it. Atheists don't like it. It really pisses people off. I love these people. I love her. I love this guy. They're great. You should listen to their podcast if you're not subscribed.
In the past, really century, a little bit more than that, is that philosophy has had to redefine its role because its scope has been whittled away by the fact that other disciplines have branched off.
Yeah, and I would say, aside from the fact that yes, historically the lines have been blurred, even at the acme or at the most intense moment of the scientific revolution in the 17th century, the people that we now associate as the fathers of science, of modern science and modern physics,
we're all philosophers.
Yeah, I mean, they were called natural philosophers.
Yeah.
So they were philosophers whose object was nature, its
Exactly.
dynamics, its lawful regularities.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right that the history of specialization really is a much more narrow, more recent history having to do with the rise of the university,
Yeah.
having to do with the rise of departments, so on and so forth. But in that reality, we do face departments of philosophy that in some ways have to articulate what it is that separates them from.
I wonder how they view the supposed downfall of the university system that is being either predicted or preempted by the quote unquote right. You look at what used to be the center left has now kind of, as the Overton window has moved, that grouping has viewed, and you see it in the cynicism of, that going to college isn't useful anymore. I have, literally I have a humanities degree. That's what I have. Most people consider it useless, and I haven't been able to use it for much. In fact, I need to go back to school with this new job works out and I end up earning some cash, I need to go get a degree in something a little bit more substantial. You know, it only take like 5 hours, but saying you have a humanities and arts or humanities and philosophy, or depending on what title you get, doesn't do anything. And I've talked to people who have masters in philosophy, even doctorates in philosophy, and they tell me the same thing. You know, people who I started off with, when I see them again, I ask them, "Have you used your degree?" And they're like, "No." Like, unless you're a professor, you're just not using a doctorate of philosophy, whether it's, you know, whatever branch you're in. Unless you're a professor, you're just not using that degree that way. I know when I was studying, they were saying, well, you know, you could be a CEO, but, you know, that's assuming you have the income to start a company. You know, like it's just, it's like a Swiss Army knife of skills, because you're, on one hand, you get really good at research, you get really good at reading, you get really good at comprehension, but in another sense, it becomes so esoteric and so out of reach from the common person, because the common person doesn't read as much as you do on the topics that you're reading about. So while to you, you are still a novice in whatever topic you're specializing in, to them, your language is so out of reach that they sometimes can't even understand what you're saying.
From other ones. And one of the ways in which this is sometimes articulated is in terms of the objectlessness of philosophy, the fact that philosophy has kind of this freedom to talk about so many aspects of reality, so many aspects of the world that are not accessible in the same way to other disciplines. You know, in the math department, there will be a lot of people who specialize in math, in numbers, in functions.
Presumably everyone specializes in math in the math department.
Yes, exactly. But you could have a philosopher of mathematics who is just as much an expert in those questions, but who is actually in a philosophy department. And the same thing for philosophy of physics. There's always philosophy of insert any other discipline. In a way that the reverse is not always true. Right?
There's the reverse is usually not true.
Yeah, it's usually not true. So there's philosophy of mathematics, but there's no mathematics of philosophy. And so one possible way of articulating the difference is that it has to do with this unbounded freedom to pursue wisdom, you know, in a friendly, loving way, and follow it wherever it might lead you.
I'm trying to remember who it was. Maybe I can find it, actually, because I think Dennett talks about it in this book, Intuition Pumps. It might have been Gilbert Ryle, who talks about philosophy as the study of how things hang together in the most
And then that's the other thing, is that the authors and the writings that are important within the realm of philosophy, even on the fringes, they're not authors that other people know. Are there people who they heard of and they have an idea of? Maybe it's something they read their freshman year in college, maybe their senior year in high school, maybe that one lost year that they had, and they tied into one book, and that's their whole world of philosophy. And it's a very small window into a much bigger library. So you'll mention things like, I'll pull a book, you know, and people don't know what I'm talking about because they don't know the author. Theology is its own branch of philosophy. Theology is just so deep and so rich with so many writers that you can get lost in that and lose view of all the other philosophies and all the other contrasting views. So you're just constantly feeding your brain information and you're processing it all the time. And it takes a long time. You're thinking all the time. That's what philosophy is. So, yeah.
Broadest possible sense, yes.
Who was that?
I honestly don't remember who said that, but it's like, yeah, it's commonly cited in discussions about philosophy.
Okay, so we're going to keep going with this video, but if you're watching on YouTube, we will have just put it in the video.
Who said that?
As a caption. So we are properly checking our sources.
Yeah,
probably citing our sources.
Somebody did say that, and the idea is that what philosophy allows you to do is take a pen.
So when my channel took a hit in its popularity, one of the things that I had to do was I had to remove the books behind me that were talking about the topic that I was talking about, because my knee-jerk reaction was just to grab the book, go to the reference, and talk about it, which is boring for most audiences.
Panoramic view upon a body of knowledge or a series of facts and unify them. And this is tied to that image of philosophy that does emerge with if you trace the history of philosophy, especially in the West, the notion of philosophy as the queen of the sciences,
Yeah.
the one that stands above the rest and in some ways gives order
Yeah.
to the body of knowledge that all the other sciences are generating from the ground up. So here, seeing how things hang in the broadest possible sense of the term is an act of governing or of regulation.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, and not necessarily on this governing point, but I do think there is something to the stereotype that philosophy asks big questions. And it asks big questions in different ways. There isn't just one way of asking big questions. There isn't just one domain of big questions that philosophy asks. But I find that to be a useful way of framing it, at least in terms of the kinds of things that I'm doing in my everyday life, right? Thinking about ontology, the study of being, thinking about ethics, thinking about whether or not humans have freedom and what the nature of the will is. Those are things that philosophers typically study.
Yeah, so
We have a lot of freedom to do so. That's the nice thing about philosophy. It has a lot of freedom to it.
It has a lot of freedom, and it means that you can pursue big questions. And this has been like historically the dominant argument as to the specificity and the difference of philosophy. That it would sort of tackle the biggest questions that other disciplines couldn't. Of course, I could imagine somebody in a different discipline saying something like, "Well, physics tackles maybe equally big questions."
Yeah, this is. I've literally run afoul of some Bible scholars a few days ago. If you actually listen to my video, I'm agreeing with every single thing they said. But because I'm coming at it from a philosophical point of view, and because of the way that I'm saying it is lending credence to the theological viewpoints, or at least leaving the door open for the theological viewpoints to be true, and not discounting the spiritual. It just becomes this, I don't know, this world of misunderstanding where, like, you're not respecting my discipline. You're not respecting apologetics. You're not respecting my belief. You're not respecting my field of study because you think you know so much. You're acting arrogant. And it's not acting arrogant. It's just, in philosophy, you're reading so many different points of view, and you can't just hold one point of view as more valid than another point of view. You kind of have to all put them equally out and lay them out, and then measure each one based on how completely it handles certain things and which way certain philosophies or ways of thinking tackle certain problems. And that does get in the way of some practical stuff. It's like some people will think that you're not a good multitasker because you spend time thinking about what you're doing before you do it. And that's a shame. It's a shame that people look down on thinking and critical thinking, because it is super necessary to life, and it's super necessary to your internal life.
About the nature of reality.
Or somebody saying, well, yeah, philosophy might ask big questions, but
It gives little answers.
Well, and even worse than that, is it asking them in the right way, too?
Yes, is it asking them in the right way? Now,
We obviously think that philosophy can offer some answers because we are philosophers, but...
yeah, well, I don't even know if I believe that philosophy...
So I would be scared to call myself a philosopher. I've been doing philosophy since I was 15. Since I walked away from religion, I've been doing philosophy. I was brutally picked on. I was a really small... I actually, in a recent video, I showed a video of me in, I think, 5th grade or in 6th grade, and I'm just this tiny, skinny, feminine boy. And I felt so isolated because the way that I would think and the things that I would say, nobody else would catch on except for this one uncle of mine who was a philosopher. And he handed me Plato. He gave me Plato. He gave me The Art of War. He gave me the Book of Five Rings. And he gave me this book on yoga, more of the meditation stuff. It was some kind of Buddhist text. I don't remember it anymore. Or maybe it was a Vedic text. Anyway, not the point. And it was in reading Plato that I saw my thoughts, my questions reflected back to me for the first time. That I saw someone thinking the way that I think and asking the questions that I ask and seeing the world the way that I saw it. And I was like, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who thinks like this. I'm not the only one who asks these questions. And it felt great. So I think philosophy is very powerful. But because of how powerful I think it is, even though I've kept reading theology for the last 10 years and I've kept up with philosophy up until I started getting into deep theology, I almost couldn't call myself a philosopher because of, I never studied another language or anything like that. I never got that far. I'm still reading the popular translations of a lot of these works. Anyway.
If you can give answers per se, but I do think it can help us ask questions in a productive, challenging way. And sometimes philosophers will say that there is value in just knowing the question that you have to ask, even if there's no answer to it.
Okay, but I want to push you a little bit on that because this is your book, When Animals Dream. This is not like a promotional video. It literally just happened to be behind me. And it is the second book I pulled out, so it's not the only one. It's not a plant. Because in this book, you do state a lot of things. You're not just asking questions. So, now that I am facing you with your own baby, don't you think this has answers?
Yes, it definitely has all the answers that you will need for living a good life. But my point, and this is interesting because I have been told by people that what they like about this text is that it's not just philosophy. That there is a good amount of empirical science.
Okay.
And so it's unclear whether what people experience as the answers of it come from the philosophical or the scientific side, or a combination of the two.
But you develop a theory of consciousness in this text, and that theory of consciousness is not, but it's science. It's grounded in science, but I would say it's philosophical.
Yeah, but especially.
So, one of the things that happens in philosophy is that because you're thinking all the time, you sometimes get the false arrogance that you're the first one to come up with an idea. So in my early exploration of philosophy, on my own account, I came up with the concept of ultimate reality and the concept of divine time travel, and I thought these were unique ideas to me. And then you start reading enough philosophy and you see, oh no, a lot of people have hit the idea of ultimate realities and how that plays into chronology and time and perception and even morality and responsibility. And not a lot, but a few have come up with the idea of divine time travel, or what it would take to be a truly objective observer and truly be not non-receptive, but to be able to actually be an actual effector or affector, be an effector of things. And this is just this really interesting cosmic chain of events of how you make decisions and how you do things and how time works. And you start looking into the philosophy of, let's say, genetics, or the philosophy of physics, time. And what ends up happening is you discover you're not the first one to ask this question. You're not crazy for asking this question. And people have put real thought into it. And I know one of the hardest things for me when I got into the YouTube sphere, especially when talking about religion as philosophy. Yes, Yes, Benjamin Jowett. Yes. I think I've said it in my bookshelf tour, Thomas. I said that my favorite translator actually of most works is W.H.D. Rouse. Jordan, part of the fun of philosophy is discovering ideas for yourself. Yeah, yeah, it really is. It really is exhilarating to come to those ideas, but it's also humbling to realize that if you look hard enough, you're not the first one to come up with those ideas. So it's just really cool. It connects you to humanity and connects you to different societies, and to realize that someone in Indonesia 1,000 years ago, someone in the Mediterranean 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, was thinking the same thing. It's a beautiful philosophy is a beautiful thing.
I would actually say scientist philosophers of I would actually say scientist theories of consciousness are philosophies as well.
Exactly, and there are just as many philosophies of consciousness as there are philosophers of consciousness. And so it's not as if I've found the answer to what consciousness is, an answer that could sort of trump or falsify other ones.
Okay.
I've added another lens, another interpretation.
Well, and that's the thing that pisses people off, is that they want you to take a side. People want you to say, well, okay, so you read all that stuff, so you agree with me now. And I'm like, I didn't say that. I said I read the stuff, it made sense, it was logical, it was sound. But that doesn't mean that I agree with you. I like your idea and I want to hear more of it, but it doesn't mean I agree with you. And that really frustrates people because they want you to be on their side and you're not opposing them. You're just like, no, that's really cool, but I still want to see what the other side had to say. And if there's more sides to it, I want to see what they have to say. And I want to compare all the different sides and play with the ideas and see what happens when you put different ideas together and what works and what doesn't. A lot of people don't like that.
Yeah.
And so is that an answer? Well, sure. Is it the answer? No, not in the same way. And
Yeah.
so,
But I think that's fine.
Well,
Like,
of course
I
that's
don't
fine.
think, I think actually this is also the case in the sciences as well, too, that, of course there are some questions that have a right or wrong answer, but there are many questions that have many different answers. And so if we think about philosophy as this pursuit of thinking, there's a dialectic there involved.
I promise I have not watched this video beforehand. I'm just thinking the same thing. So yeah, but I've not pre-watched it. Okay.
Involving asking questions, developing answers to those questions, and those answers aren't necessarily going to be ultimate fixed answers, but that's part of the beauty of thought as well, is this journey of shaping our ideas.
Yeah, and so I'm realizing just how central this question of the boundaries of philosophy has been in my work, in various aspects of my work, even when I didn't realize it. Because
I think I violated, or at least transgress or push the boundaries of philosophy because I'm so isolated from other philosophical thinkers in my personal life. And maybe that is transgressive. Maybe that is a little edgelord of myself. But there comes a time where you just want to be challenged and where you want to challenge other people and you want to see what ideas shake out. I know some people think of that as mind games, but I don't think that's mind games at all. It's just reasoning. It's just thinking. You want to know if the idea being presented is the best idea. And the only way to do it is to play the idea out in the real world. So
I used to publish more regularly on the history of science, this came up in the following way. So around the 19th century, this is an argument that I make in one of my publications, something really bizarre happened in science, in European science, that gave science a sudden freedom from philosophy.
Okay.
And sort of the queen of the sciences, philosophy, was dethroned.
Yeah.
And science sort of established itself, because for a long time people would say what philosophy gives you is answers to metaphysical questions that physics and the natural sciences by definition can't tackle. But in the 19th century, there is what is sometimes called the second scientific revolution, which is this moment where scientific progress just sort of speeds up.
And I think right now, for the lay people, for the lay person, the non-academic person, there is a second enlightenment happening because of the internet. So you see a lot of people discovering the Gnostic text for the first time, or different heretical religious texts that are tangentially related to Christianity or some kind of Abrahamic faith. And it's just blowing their mind. It's just completely opening up their way of thinking. And is it creating heretics? Yeah, sure, probably. But I have a love affair with at least two heretics in my life. I love Kierkegaard. I love Master Eckhart. So, maybe I'm a little too sympathetic to him. But I think we are going through a type of enlightenment right now for the common lay person, non-academic person, where they have access to information that was limited to the scholars. And I think that is where places like MythVision and Digital Hammurabi are inadequately dealing with this new world. And so I don't think secular scholarship is going to somehow discount spiritualism or metaphysics. I just don't see that happening. What I think is going to happen is that after this explosion happens, there will be a readaptation of all these ways of thinking. And they will be reintegrated into the greater consciousness, just like they always are during every intellectual revolution. And I don't want to see it regress. I don't want to become regressive like after the Arabic scientific revolution, then it regressed to a more dogmatic anti-intellectualism. I don't want that to happen. But I do see that the access to immense amounts of information is going to cause some kind of irrevocable revolution of knowledge, of understanding in the West. It has to. You have people reading these works for the first time with no context, with no way to judge the quality of one work over the quality of another work. Jordan says, people know where to go for information and knowledge, but people today seem to have trouble knowing where to find wisdom. I cannot agree with you more, buddy. That's the truest thing you've said, and you've said some very true things on this channel.
And it gets really interesting. Suddenly you have developments in mathematics that start sort of directly bearing on questions that philosophers have traditionally thought as their domain.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, there are developments in mathematical notions of infinity. Infinity is a metaphysical concept that philosophers normally would be, this is my turf.
Yeah.
Similarly, you start seeing the development of really complex theories of time in physics. Time is another sort of metaphysical subject that traditionally was the turf of philosophy. And so, in thinking about the boundaries of philosophy...
I literally talked about that at the beginning of this video. I promise I did not pre-watch this.
It's also the case that sometimes other disciplines have made claims upon the domain of philosophy, such that it's really unclear whether we can, even now in the age of departmental specialization, meet.
And I do think that's something that's happening in the Christian world and in the Islamic world, where you have different disciplines intermixing and different departments, if you will, trying to make claims over their authority and on a certain topic. And so the public doesn't see the difference between a theologian, a scholar, an apologist, and a biblical critic who's doing literary work on the Bible. In the Islamic world, you don't, I don't think people understand the difference between what the theologian is doing and what the scholar inside academia is doing when they're examining the Quran. These are different intellectual pursuits. And you have different departments trying to make claims over their authority, over their understanding of how it works, and then they're out in public trying to argue against another department. But we don't understand, as the general public, that these are academic arguments between departments, between department heads. These are the philosophy department arguing with the religion department, arguing with the critical literature department, arguing with the biblical criticism department, arguing with the archaeology department. We just hear it as scholars, just as like this general mess of people just arguing with each other, and we are trying to understand that in our own lives when we're not realizing the distinction between the realms that are being spoken of. And you have these kind of like, well, I'm going to try to put my flag into this over here, even though that's not really my realm, and I'm going to try to pull it over to my department. It's weird how the academic world is flexing its muscles in the lay world currently. I think it's because of the internet, to be honest with you.
Separate the philosophers from the non-philosophers.
Well, that's what I was saying before about how what's now political science, sociology, anthropology, and so forth used to be philosophy. I think the most current development now, where you see this a lot, is neuroscience, which for most of the 20th century.
So I was going to say physics, because I watch a lot of physics, and the physics sounds very philosophical. But yes, the neuroscience is definitely there. I'd say even psychology has become very philosophical, especially since, the whole political mess with Jordan Peterson.
Didn't care at all about questions of consciousness, now wonderfully has started to care about questions of consciousness, but you see all these neuroscientists coming out with books about consciousness, and at the same time, there's still a broad cultural stereotype that philosophy is useless. I'm like, okay, look at that neuroscience book that just came out. That is a book of philosophy. It's
I said this at the time, and I even have a video of it called "Where Jordan Peterson is Wrong," where I was just talking about how what Jordan Peterson was talking about in Maps of Meaning, because I actually read the Maps of Meaning, not just the popular 12 Rules for Life. That's just a philosophical understanding of text. That's all that is. So he brought philosophy into the world of psychology, and then he brought that very strong mix of ideas into the popular consciousness because of his political activities.
It's grounded in neuroscience, sure, but it's still making philosophical claims. And I think, in a different angle. So there's this question of philosophy, of other disciplines encroaching, say, on philosophy. There's also a question of philosophy, quote unquote, encroaching on other disciplines as well.
Yes.
One of the things that I really like about philosophy, as I said before, is that we can basically study anything and do so in a philosophical way. One of my favorite anecdotes on this is from the existentialists, where there's this philosopher Raymond Aron, who's not very well remembered by the tradition now, but he was friends with Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir as young people, and he heard about this new philosophy of phenomenology, actually, which, if you know from listening to our podcast or watching our videos, a lot of overlaps between phenomenology and existentialism. But he comes back from Germany where he was studying phenomenology, and he says, Beauvoir, Sartre, you guys won't believe it. If you study phenomenology, you can make philosophy out of this apricot cocktail, because they were at a bar in Paris drinking apricot cocktails. And so I think that's a beautiful way of showing that philosophy is in anything and everything. At the same time,
I think every good bartender at a bar where you can actually talk to the bartender, and they're actually they're kind of half being a priest, half being a therapist. I think every good bartender is a philosopher. Honest truth.
however, I think that philosophy sometimes has a bit of a problem where we're overconfident because we are living in a society that undervalues us. So when you hear Neil deGrasse Tyson, for instance, like knock philosophy, as a philosopher, your tendency is to be like, he doesn't know what he's talking about. That's a philosophical claim that he's making. And I think that's right. But I also think that that response, that knee-jerk response we have to be like, no, see, philosophy is in anything and everything, can kind of bite
I'm laughing because I've said that out loud to people.
us in the back, because I also think philosophy sometimes needs to be humble in recognizing the developments of other disciplines. And I'll give you an example here, which is from my work in feminist philosophy of love. The philosophy of love, generally speaking, has a lot to learn from other disciplines. Sure, we can learn from psychology and neuroscience about the biological correlates to the feeling or state of love, but I also think it's really important for us to learn from feminist history about the ways that loving relationships have been shaped over time. For instance, the bourgeois love match of monogamous heterosexual marriage that has developed in the past couple of hundred years is often the default that people see as the norm of loving relationships. And when philosophers try and philosophize in a vacuum about the nature of love without attending to the history
yeah.
and like learning from women's studies departments and other disciplines, I think sociology as well, I've learned so much from sociology of love. I think we really do everybody a disservice.
And I made this point in a video a few nights ago. I think any discipline done in a vacuum does a disservice to the layperson who's going to have to be dealing with the conclusions of these arguments. So you can be super, super scholarly about anything and say, well, this is the reality of the history. But the layperson who's going to be getting these ideas filtered through pop culture, pop science, they don't hear it that way. They don't see it that way. They're reading their horoscope in the morning. They're listening to the news in the afternoon. They're going to the religious service and hearing the preacher or the whatever tell them a different understanding of it. And then they have to go home at night, and if they even think about it, decide what version of that is true. And usually it just mixes all of these ideas together into its own unique thing in that person's mind. And that's going to be what they spread. It's not, people don't live in a vacuum, and it's dangerous to do academia in a vacuum, whether it's philosophy or some other discipline.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would never disagree with that. But again, this goes to this question of then what is it that sets us apart, especially in a world where, let's say, you can find people in a women's studies department or in a sociology department who are tackling theoretical questions in their discipline, that if you just put them in a philosophy department, they would blend right in.
Mm-hmm.
And
It is weird to me that non-theoretical scholars are now doing theoretical conclusions or hypotheses in their writings to the general public. That wasn't true when I was in college 20 years ago. It's very weird. It's a very strange thing, and I think it's a little dangerous. I don't like too much metaphysics in my academics that are non-metaphysical, because you're stating something as a fact that is a thought, that is an opinion, maybe a well-structured, really good opinion, but you're taking out all the data and saying it as if it's a solid conclusion. Philosophers have been wrestling with these ideas for eons, for millennia. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 millennia, as far back as the first fire and the first people to ever sit and have a conversation. I mean, this is, or the first guy to walk off on his own to think about it, guy or gal. So yeah, they're so correct about everything that they're saying.
And when you have also people in philosophy departments, imagine you're a philosopher of physics or you're a philosopher of sociology, if you put them in a physics or sociology department, they also could kind of blend in. And so, the question here for me remains: how do we think about this difference? And I've thought about this for quite some time, and I wrote an article with a mutual friend of ours, Jessica Locke, and called the boundlessness, the groundlessness of philosophy. Where after thinking about this together, we sort of came to the conclusion that there is no ground to philosophy that could help you define it.
Okay.
That would give it any kind of stability. And so, and we've gotten some pushback on that account.
So what have people's responses been?
Well, people have proposed various ways of thinking about philosophy that would give you that definitional power.
I'm wondering what those are.
So, for instance, you could define philosophy as the discipline that deals with concepts and the manipulation of concepts.
Yeah.
You could define it as a field that is that specializes on a particular kind of method, like argumentation. You could also define it as the discipline that seeks to understand ultimate truth in some kind of fundamental metaphysical way.
Okay.
And so you can imagine various ways of defining philosophy. So that's one
See the beginning of this video when I had that conversation before we hit play.
kind of push.
Yeah.
We also weirdly have gotten a kind of pragmatic, strategic, institutional push of people who say, look, you might be right, but making this argument at a time when philosophy departments are under threat of being cut is not particularly helpful, because when we go to talk to like our university presidents about why they shouldn't cut the philosophy department, we want them to believe that we do something.
They're like, I read this article and you don't actually have any specificity, so you're cut.
I know that
It's when speaking to religious people, this is probably the hardest thing. And again, this is what I just said about when other disciplines try to take philosophical ideas and make them definitives. We're constantly playing with the idea. We're constantly adjusting and tweaking and exploring the idea. We're not standing still on one idea. So, for instance, the SBL Bible that I just reviewed, it has feminist theory from about, I guess, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago in there, dictating what the Bible actually means. That's insane. The feminist theory is growing. It's a growing field. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful field. But to think that the hypotheses in the theory are conclusions is insane. To put that in a textbook, to speak on transcendental metaphysical truths and to present them as absolute facts in a book that's supposed to be foundational to your understanding of anything. I just, that seems so dangerous. It's like giving a loaded weapon to someone and not giving them any lessons. The discipline itself has rules and functions and ways of working, and there's ways of getting into an idea and expressing the idea. And if all you do is take a conclusion from that process without having thought through the process yourself, you don't have any idea of the functionality of the answer. So you lose your perspective. I don't understand why academia is doing this. It seems very strange to me to take Stoicism and dump it into a Bible, to take Aristotelian metaphysics and dump it into a book on mathematics. I don't know why that's happening currently.
That's actually my
Your
response to
greatest
that.
contribution as a philosopher is to cut
Cutting.
philosophy departments.
And it's not an attack on philosophy. It's not to say that philosophy doesn't exist. It's simply to say that it doesn't have clear boundaries and it doesn't have a foundation. So it's an anti-foundationalist take on this discipline.
Okay, and you do think that other disciplines have clear boundaries?
They have clearer boundaries, yeah, and
Clearer boundaries?
clearer
Clearer,
boundaries.
yes, clearer,
Because, and I
clearer.
can say something about that. So there are disciplines where you can find unity in the discipline, for example, at the level of object. Mathematicians, they study number in all of its manifestations. You're never going to find a mathematician that studies love. That's just not the right object. Women's studies faculty. They study sex, sexuality.
Okay, I didn't quite get there in what I was just saying, but that's where I was going, which is exactly what he's saying. I just don't want to see a math book that's describing what love is and how love works. I don't want to see it. I don't want that reality because that's not how love works in actuality. The books on Bible scholarship that are trying to tackle theological issues and trying to either discount or disprove hermeneutics is an insane attempt. You're trying to murder a philosophy. You're trying to murder a perspective, an interpretation. That doesn't work. That's not what the science is there for. Just present the facts. That's your job. Your job is to present the facts, and who cares if the theologians and the academics the academics and the apologists get offended? Just put the facts on the floor, man, and let the philosophers philosophize about it. Let the apologists make their defense about it. That's the whole point. Okay, I'm going to keep this one short because, like I said, I got stuff to do tomorrow. So I'm going to go maybe about 5 to 10 more minutes. I'm going to let them say one more round. I'll make my commentary, and then we'll continue this tomorrow night. Let's keep going. And are you wondering, for those who are coming into this from Overthink and they're watching my commentary and they wonder why I keep on going back to religion, my channel has been covering religion for the last 6 years, so that's why I keep going back to that.
And gender, one way or another. And so you can go through that kind of account for various disciplines, for most disciplines. When it comes to philosophy, we just don't have unity at the level of the object because of that freedom that we discussed. And so the other way you can go about this is to say, well, maybe we have a specific method. And that's where most people fall. They will say, we use rationality, concept manipulation, intuition, even if you're an intuitionist. But not only is there no agreement about what the method of philosophy is, any interpretation of the canon, any account of what the canon is or should be, will always include people whose methods have been completely inconsistent relative to one another.
Yeah.
I was literally thinking, what if your method is absurdism? What if you're coming to something from an absurdist point of view? All right, okay. This was beautiful. This was absolutely beautiful. I love doing this. I loved having this video on. I plan on doing this tomorrow night. Hopefully I make a sell and I make some money and I can pay the bills and we can keep this going. So, all right. I love you all. For everyone watching during the day, my current schedule is this: Monday through Thursday, I will do one stream a night, usually around 10:30 or 11:30, for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I will try, I'm not promising, I will try to do one open room a week, either on Friday or Saturday. I do have a Twitch channel where I do gaming. Right now I'm doing Baldur's Gate and Cyberpunk. I know everybody else has kind of moved on to Helldivers too, but whatever. I'm not trying to be trendy. All that archives on a gaming channel here on YouTube. That channel covers Vampire the Masquerade, Cyberpunk Red, and Legend of the Five Rings. Yes, to quote one of my viewers, this did give me a bit of philosophical euphoria, and I'm very grateful for it. I needed it today. Oh, anyway, I was plugging. I do have a secret alt channel where I'm losing weight. I've already lost over 15 pounds. I went from having a big old gut at the beginning of 3 weeks ago to where now I have a mild gut that only sometimes pops out. If you want to, you can watch that one. If you can find it, I'm not going to tell you the name of the channel, but that channel exists. I do have a Discord for those who want to have discussions. I do have a Tumblr where I do archive philosophical works that I was working on before I took a career in sales. And there's still writings there if you want to read some of my old works. Anyway, peace, like, and subscribe. I'll talk to you all later. See you all tomorrow night. I'm planning for a 10:30 showing. And I think my next video coming up is going to be a book tour of just my religious books for my upload. I think that'll be on Sunday. All right. Peace, like, and subscribe. Talk to you all tomorrow. Bye.
I will never settle, got my foot up on the pedal, pushing hard to the metal, make a deal with the devil, channel rage through my vessel into something that is special, energy of a rebel, going up a level, I just wanna be greatness, I could feel changes.